Greetings, true believers! Today let's talk about the cinematic universe and why it's a unicorn at best and a financial disaster at worst. Excelsior! What's up, Internet? Jay here with Nerd Rage Against the Machine. Today we're going to talk about the cinematic universe. It's been a big buzzword in Hollywood lately, and while one of them did definitely succeed, you have to wonder about the other ones. There was also just recently an issue, or an article in Variety that talked about how the Marvel Cinematic Universe is falling apart and how they're having to rely on all these crazy things to get it back together if they can, and they probably can't. And I'm not 100% sold on that, but there's other issues as well. I mean, look at some of the other attempts at cinematic universes, the Dark Universe for one, and just recently, the Barbie movie was a huge hit, hugely profitable film. I took my kid to see it. She's seen it multiple times at this point. It's made $1 billion, and what Mattel took from that wasn't, hey, you know what? You get a great director who's talented and has passion for a project, and we can make a good product. Instead, what they've taken away is the idea that they want to make their own cinematic universe, the Mattel cinematic universe. And this to me is insane because there's no through line. What's going to happen? Is Skeletor going to take over Barbie Land, and it's going to be up to Big Jim, Pulsar, Matt Mason, Max Steel, and He-Man to save them with their Hot Wheels cars? And don't forget, of course, Barney, Wishbone, and Uno, and Magic 8 Ball, which are all supposedly going to be shot as well. So, yeah, cue that Avengers music. I just don't think it's going to happen. Or at least if it does happen, it's going to fail like so many others. I mean, Hasbro's talked about a cinematic universe, which at least I can see a storyline there. Transformers, G.I. Joe, Mask, and some of the other ones that could all come together. But even so, it very rarely, if ever, works. And that's kind of what I want to talk about is, one, why Marvel worked, and two, why these other ones don't. To that end, let's start with a very basic concept. And it's going to be very, what's the word I'm looking for? It's going to be very off the cuff, or very, it's going to seem like a tangent, but trust me, it will all make sense in the end. Method to my madness, as it will. And the first thing we're going to talk about is an old saying I'm sure you've probably heard. The book is better than the movie. This is a statement I've never completely agreed with, mostly for a couple of reasons. One, you always hear that they talk about how books give you more imagination than movies, which I kind of get. But ultimately, this was a sentiment that was created back when a lot of movie adaptations were done and there wasn't a lot of other media. Now that we have a lot of other mediums, books, comic books, TV shows, movies, video games, role-playing games. What I think really comes down to is that the statement should be revised for today to be something more like the original media is better than the adaptation. And yes, there are, of course, rules, exceptions to every rule, but there's a reason I say this, and let me explain this. There's two reasons. Number one, nobody adapts something that's garbage. You'll never see a movie for the ill-fated comic book Trencher. You'll never see a cinematic, high-end, high-budget movie for Bubsy the Bobcat, or the spate of other terrible video games that weren't based on properties already. So that's the first thing is nobody's going to adapt something that is clearly inferior in its own media. But two, and this is the big one. Anyone who makes a good story and makes a good movie, TV show, what have you, the author of that medium understands two very important facts, and that is how to leverage the strengths of that medium and mitigate its weaknesses. I'll give you three perfect examples in three different mediums. First, we're going to go with Harry Potter in books. Now, I know J.K. Rowling is canceled and all that, but this is just for descriptive purposes. I'm not trying to support her as a writer or anything. But if you look at the book, in the book, there's a scene early on where Harry first meets Malfoy, and that meeting is very much all in his head, which is something that books are strong on. So he meets Malfoy in a situation where they're getting measured for their robes, and his first thought is, he sees this kid who's the first wizarding kid he's seen, and his response is, wow, this could be my best friend. This could be my ride or die. I could be the best man at this guy's wedding. And vice versa, you never know. And then he starts to listen to him speak about, mudbloods and general snobbishness, and he starts realizing, God, this is just my cousin Dudley in a wizard form. No, thank you. Well, when they adapt this to the movie, of course, the problem is, they didn't really have a way of doing internalizing as well in a film. So you have this rather ham-handed, Harry's already met Ron and Hermione, and basically Malfoy gives him the, oh, you're Harry Potter, I know you're famous, and you should join the dark side, we have cookies, kind of speech that is really not very well done. But again, nothing against Chris Columbus, who is a good director. It really came down to, we just got to get this, we got to at least introduce the story element, even if we can't do it ideally. Now, another example. We're going to go to cinema this time. Star Wars, the original 1977 version. Now look, I'm not saying the book was bad. It was probably one of the better adaptations. At the same time, the book, it's a simple story. It really is. And there's maybe some information in the book that's not in the show, but one of the things that cinema does really well is spectacle. You can describe, these great scenes all you want. You can spend the J.R.R. Tolkien, requisite 7 pages to describe a tree, but seeing a tree, and there's a reason they say a picture's worth 1,000 words. And 30 pictures a second does that pretty well. George Lucas was hailed as a genius for the whole idea of the lived-in future and the look of that film, which you're just not going to get from the book. I think if it had been a book first, it probably would have been a mediocre sell at best. In fact, there's a story where Ron Howard recalled Lucas was recording Cindy Williams, who was Shirley and Laverne and Shirley, and they were both in American Graffiti together, and she showed Ron Howard the original script for Star Wars, and after reading it, he said, God, that's too bad. I really was rooting for this guy, and it sounds like his career's pretty much over because of this. But again, seeing it on the screen, totally different story. Now, this third one, I'm going to use video games. Another perfect example of how that medium is made strong. This one, unfortunately, does not have a adaptation yet, but I'm sure it's coming. And that is BioShock. For anyone who's ever played BioShock, first off, spoilers if you haven't. Spoiler alert, but at the same time, the thing's been out since the PS3, Xbox 360 era. So it's on you if you haven't played it by now. Anyway, in the game, you play a survivor who is in this undersea city named Rapture, and you have a guy in the ear, the radio guy, by the name of Atlas. Now the fun thing is that Atlas always speaks in this Irish brogue and says, would you kindly? Would you kindly pick up that radio? Would you kindly do this? Would you kindly do that? And these are all things that are engineered as a gamer that you're going to have to do them anyway. The first time it is in the bathysphere, and he says, would you kindly pick up that radio? And that's how he talks to you through the rest of the game. And the game's not going to continue till I pick this thing up, so let's just go ahead and get it over with. What you don't know is that you're actually a genetically engineered person, and that would you kindly is actually your command word. He's making you obey him every time he says it. And while, yes, this could be explained as a plot twist in a movie, in a game it's just so much more real because you've been the one he's been manipulating. There's a personal level of you're sitting there playing and all of a sudden, he does say that an awful lot. Oh my God, he's been controlling me. But knowing that, again, your mind has already been conditioned to that as a gamer, you feel a little betrayal that I don't think you'd feel if it was happening to somebody else. So that's kind of where I'm coming from, is the idea that the original is normally better than the adaptation. Now, saying that, we're talking about cinematic universes, and how does one lead to the other, you may be asking. So let me explain, again, my logic here. So the one cinematic universe that we've seen work is Marvel. And Marvel is, of course, started as a comic book. This is the original medium, and this is a reprint, just so you wonder why I'm so flagrantly flapping around an original first issue of X-Men. But there are two very strong benefits of being a comic book. These are the strengths of this medium, along with others. One of which is, of course, you have that medium ground between, literature, where you can see, have some of that internal monologue, but also the spectacle of film, where you have those great shots, great artists doing amazing work, right? But the others are number two. The second one really is the fact that these characters are all in the same universe with every other comic book in their same company. So you have the Marvel superheroes. If you were a writer for, let's just imagine right now that if you were given the job of writing for Marvel, let's say they give you Captain America, and you decide tomorrow that you really, really, really want Deadpool in an issue. Barring him being completely destroyed temporarily or some other reason Marvel may give you, chances are you're going to be able to write Deadpool into your book. Unless there's some obviously huge reason Marvel would be against it, which is pretty rare. Now, by comparison, let's say that you were hired to work on, say, the new Frasier reboot. And, you decide, hey, I've got this great idea. I want to bring his brother Niles in, even though, they're no longer in the same city. This will be just like a visit. Now we have to clear this with a few different people, not the least of which is, we have to rehire David Hyde Pierson. Is he willing to do it? Can they pay him enough? There's a lot of questions there. And this is something you see in a lot of those movie to comic adaptations. I mean, even as a kid, I remember thinking when I watched the movie Superman 2, how strange this was. We have these 3 Kryptonian villains come to Earth, and they're coming to Earth, they're going to take over the world, and only Superman can stop him. Too bad he lost his powers. So my first thought, as somebody who'd watched a lot of Super Friends, was Wonder Woman having a me day? Is Captain Marvel, aka Shazam, unable to appear because he's got to study for that algebra test, or else he could flunk the 5th grade? Is Martian Manhunter just discovered Oreos for the first time and he's not leaving his lair for anything? Maybe Batman is just too busy preparing. I mean, really preparing. Because, he can defeat anybody if he can prepare long enough. It's just, again, Superman got it all taken care of before Batman could get his ass in gear, apparently. Green Lantern must have been off to another sector, etc., etc. You can see where this is all going, that, in an extended universe with thousands of heroes, it's hard to buy into the logic that that only one hero could do an Earth-saving job, and only one hero would be interested in doing an Earth-saving job. I mean, unless they were unaware of it. So, something that a lot of studios have had to do in those early movies is figure out ways for these heroes to do something that may be, the end of the world if it's not fixed, but make sure that there's no other way for other people to know about it. X-Men comes to mind for that example. Now, saying that, we have a lot of these movies, and the thing is that when you talk about that idea of extending the universe beyond one book to multiple titles, the other side of that is that it doesn't take a lot. A lot of people might think that it means you have to, in the case of that Superman movie, you have to cast a Batman, you have to cast a Wonder Woman, you have to cast... No, sometimes you can just mention, you can come up with reasons and explain them away to an extent. A perfect example of this is, think about the movie Spider-Man, which the first one with Tobey Maguire. Very good movie, don't get me wrong. But imagine how much cooler it would have been for fans if they had seen, instead of Quest Aerospace trying to take over Oscorp, it was Stark Enterprises. And again, you don't have to hire Robert Downey Jr. or even another actor to play Tony Stark or Happy Hogan or Pepper Potts. You could have some guy from acquisitions, from that position, maybe even mentioning Tony's off doing something, gambling in Monaco or what have you, blah, blah, blah. But still, you could have put all that in there. And the reason they couldn't is because Sony only owns the rights to Spider-Man. They don't own the rights to any other characters. And the legal red tape to do it would have just been insane versus, again, I'm going to write X-Men, but I would really like to have the Thing show up. Is that possible? Yeah, sure, go ahead. Just, Ben Grimm standing by whenever you need him. So that's one of the big things, and that's really where I think the Marvel Universe, as the Marvel Cinematic Universe, did the best job. The thing that they did brilliantly, especially early on, think about Iron Man. Um, there is some reference to other things, specifically Shield. Until the end credits, where Nick Fury shows up and basically tells him about the idea of the Avengers Initiative, what we have is basically Tony Stark, doing his thing, being Iron Man, and small references to the idea that there's other things. We see more of this in Captain America, and a lot more in Thor, where we at least get Hawkeye, and at these points, we've all seen, S.H.I.E.L.D. at least working. And the thing is that, if you think about it, imagine just for a second that Iron Man had been a flop. Now, I'm not saying it had to be a bad movie, but I mean, maybe it was a financial flop. Maybe something was, opposite it came out that was just so amazing, it hit the wrong time, what have you. Maybe it did better on home video later, but Marvel could have abandoned their plans for making any other superhero movies for a while at that point, and that end sequence credit sequence, the references would have still worked, but the big thing is we still had a good movie. We had a solid film there without it. Now, same with Captain America. If Captain America had been the first and a failure, for whatever reason, good movie, those references can be there without having to destroy the concept of that movie working on its own. But of course, as we all know, that didn't happen. It became a huge mega success with all these movies, except for the Hulk maybe, helping to build the Avengers. And that was, I think, the real brilliance. There's two things that I think are really the brilliant parts of the MCU that have worked, that have brought this idea into play. And the first one was making a good movie first. And I know that sounds like an easy task, make good movie, not bad movie, but it is tougher than it sounds. But the biggest thing I think is that you need to focus on what you're making and keep the idea of the possibility, and I'm going to keep hitting that point, possibility of crossovers and cinematic universes and all this stuff to the side while you're working on this thing. Now, saying all that, the other strength that I've seen with the Marvel Universe is because, again, we've gone through all these characters, and you can hate all these all these new things all you want, She-Hulk and Ms. Marvel, but what they really represent is the fact that we now have a big enough universe that we can do stories from all these comic books. And you see this within the Marvel Universe, and actually Kevin Feige even stated the idea was to make, like, Captain America is not a superhero movie. It's an espionage movie with superheroes. Thor is not a superhero movie. It's a fantasy movie with superheroes. Iron Man is Iron Man, but again, it's the with superheroes thing, not you don't make a superhero movie first. Which was, I think, a good philosophy, and at least it worked out for them. And if you look, the biggest strength they've had this whole time is being able to leverage that FOMO along with being able to change up gears. And what I mean by that is, the films that were not great. So for me, I wasn't a big fan of Ant-Man or Doctor Strange. They were okay, but, you went to see them because, well, it's going to build to something. It's going to build to this Avengers movie. I need to know who these people are, or at least have a good idea. There may be some Easter egg or some hidden piece that I need to, that needs to hit me so that I'm ready for those movies. And you see that a lot. And thankfully, in today's media, it's much easier to see these things on streaming, cable, etc., so that you could catch up even if you didn't rush to the theaters. But this also meant that some of these franchises were able to survive in ways that normal film franchises wouldn't. Take, for example, I'm going to use Batman, the Michael Keaton one. So audiences are very slow to pivot normally. So we see Batman, which was a huge hit. Batman Returns, which had some trouble because of the darker tones. It pissed off McDonald's effectively. Then, of course, we have, the next two with Schumacher. The third one, while, in my opinion, many people's opinion, a terrible movie, it still sold well. It still did well at the box office. It took 4 movies for this franchise to basically wear out its welcome. For people to go, I think I've had enough Batman after the Bat nipples and Bane and the Bat credit card. Whereas with Marvel, You know, look at the Thor movies. They're a perfect example. The first Thor movie was not great, but you had to see it because you knew you had to see it because they were setting up the Avengers. You know, by that point, you'd already seen Captain America, Hulk, Iron Man. Maybe you saw Hulk, I don't know. But point is, you had to see Thor because it was going to be important. It was going to reference a lot of things. And of course, you got your first real view of Loki, which was going to be the huge villain of Avengers. So it's definitely worth seeing if you're all in on this. But on top of that, they could then pivot. They could do, like, oh, this movie isn't great, but maybe the next one will be way better. I may not like Captain Marvel, but, I could definitely see Civil War. And that's a real strength of them. And if you look at, Thor by comparison to Batman, like I said, I think that those 89 Batman films kind of went down in quality. With Thor, it kind of went like this. We had or actually more like this. Because we had Thor was okay, The Dark World was, I think, terrible, but because of the connection to the MCU, people were willing to give Ragnarok a shot. And, of course, it mattered for the rest of the story, and, it really was a World War Hulk movie as much as it was a Thor movie. But, and then Love and Thunder wasn't great, but I would be surprised if they didn't do another Thor. I'm just going to say that. And that's really where Marvel has been brilliant with this. Marvel has had a lot of success. Whether you believe that they're in shambles now or not, they've had the success. And the problem is that anytime one studio has success, everyone sees that as that's what they got to do. And the problem is, again, this idea of interspersed stories like this really works best in comic books. Now, DC, I know their cinematic universe did not do as well. And I'm very hopeful for what James Gunn has got planned for the soft reboot of this. But again, it's because of the fact that they made a lot of these same mistakes that I was talking about. One, yes, you need to reference these things. Another example of this actually in Lois and Clark: The Adventures of Superman, the old Dean Cain show. I remember being really excited when he tries on the costume for the first time and he asks his mom why it's so bright and colorful, and she's like, I don't want people to mistake you for that nut job running around Gotham. They mentioned Batman. They mentioned a greater DC universe. But, you didn't have to show it. You didn't have to hire an actor to play Bruce Wayne to make that work. You just had to mention that, Gotham has some nut job running around fighting crime. Actually, more than a nut job, as we all know. But that was all it took. That little bit of information, that little spark. And another example of this is actually in James Gunn's show Peacemaker, where he's referenced other heroes that have not shown up. Like, there's, and for him being kind of a sour guy, he's always mentioning them in, terrible ways. Aquaman has sex with fish. Green Arrow likes to dress as the back half of Twilight Sparkle at Brony conventions. He's also talked about Doll Man being, one of those shrinking superheroes, and the homunculi freak him out. So, yeah, Doll Man just freaks him out. Same with also mentioning Matter Eater Lad eating an entire Arby's because I think they got his curly fries wrong. But again, they haven't had to show these things, and honestly, Peacemaker was not a super expensive production. But all I had to do was just reference these things again and again, and it worked. It was beautiful. So, what happened before this? Well, DC saw Marvel and went, that's easy, we can do that. And started with Green Lantern, which was a terrible movie. And I think a lot of it was the arrogance of the production staff and the direction. They wanted this idea of, Mattel got involved to make Hot Wheels toys, so they had to make some Hot Wheels references. They went for this whole CGI spectacle, and it flopped. So they went back to the drawing board, decided to do the opposite of Marvel, make it all dark and hard, did Man of Steel, and then did Batman v Superman. Batman v Superman and Justice League both suffer from a lot of the same problems. One, you have a director with no real passion for this as a project. He's not a comic book fan. He wants to, in fact, Zack Snyder even mentioned at one point that if he'd gotten a chance to do a Batman film, he would have him raped in prison. No. That is not how you do Batman. And honestly, he showed how little he cared for or really understood the concept of how to make a good Superman movie. I mean, Superman is so easy. In fact, even then, Warner executives said, well, it's obvious that he's too out of touch and it'd be impossible to represent Superman. It's like, all you have to do is, picture him. He's a guy with the powers of a god and the sensibilities that we think of as the good sensibilities of the Midwest. Andy Griffith. Andy Griffith mentality, godlike powers. That's Superman. That's all you have to do. But again, they pushed this idea of dark, angry, angsty Superman, and then they compounded this by trying to turn the Justice League into one big exposition dump to, this is going to be a huge saga, lots of false gravitas with slow motion and heavy music scores, ending, of course, in, the idea that we're going to show you all these heroes existing. We're going to give you, like small video snippets of The Flash and Wonder Woman, and you're going to love it because this is going to be the DC Cinematic Universe. And they didn't deserve a W at this point, which thankfully they didn't get. And if you look at them, when these films started working is when they started realizing that they couldn't really rely on the cinematic universe. Instead, they relied on making a good movie first. Wonder Woman, Shazam, Aquaman, all were pretty decent movies as single-shot films. Blue Beetle, which was a recent film, I rather enjoyed it. Now, again, I know it's going to be part of the soft reboot, and we will see more Jaime Reyes as we go on, and I'm not saying it was a perfect film, but it was a solid movie. It was a good movie. It wasn't something that I would look at and go, oh my God, it was terrible. And again, they didn't do a lot to set up anything. It wasn't, like they didn't start, talking more about, where's Booster Gold or how they connect to other heroes. There's one throwaway line where they're talking about the previous Blue Beetle, Ted Kord, being kind of like Batman, but more light and airy and not as successful. And his Uncle Rudy says, Batman's a fascist. That kind of stuff is fine. That gives you, that they reference the others, but not, it's not like they're setting up some huge thing. And that's, I think, one of the things that still makes me very hopeful for what James Gunn has planned. Now, back to the other examples of cinematic universes and things that have been causing problems. One of the big ones, I think, is, again, this idea of exposition dumps, of pushing. Also, Universal, for example, had their dark universe, the idea of an all-horror thing. And again, you have these great monsters. You feel free to make good monster movies. If that's what you're known for that, Universal. Reboot Dracula, reboot The Mummy. But if you can put them together, cool. If not, fine. And I think that we would have been better off seeing, a slow burn to this. Maybe do a Dracula versus the Mummy or Dracula versus Frankenstein movie. Not just try to cram them all together. And because again, we had the same thing, this exposition dump, this idea of, they're all going to be part of the same universe. You need to watch all these films. And the reason for this, again, while it was brilliant with the idea of, in Marvel, like I said, you can do a horror story, you could do a comedic story, you could do a romantic story. All under the same umbrella. In the case of Universal, it's all horror. What are you doing different? Now, again, some people love horror, don't get me wrong. But if you're going to put out that many movies a year and try to cram this much down everyone's throat, it's going to start to become a slog. Even if there is a Monsters United, Avengers-like movie several films in. And that's where, this idea of the cinematic universe, I think, has become more studio and corporate greed and not understanding what the idea of a cinematic universe is and how it works. But rather looking at Marvel and going, these guys are printing money. They can make shit movies like, Ant-Man, and still people will go see them because, it's in hopes of seeing that bigger, better movie with the Avengers. Well, as you can tell, it doesn't always work. For one, you have to be very soft in your launch, but also I think that there is an amount of overdoing it, which leads me into where Marvel, if Marvel is failing, where is failing? And I don't think that it is really. And I say that for one reason. As many times as you've heard someone say that She-Hulk was the worst thing ever, Ms. Marvel was the worst thing ever, and most of these are those typical YouTube haters that we've all seen before. The people who cried wolf that She-Ra doesn't look feminine enough, or that Star Wars is terrible now that there's a female lead. Those kind of garbage takes. Now saying, well, the Marvel universe is dying, which I think is also kind of, they really want to see that. They want to see the Schadenfreude, and that's what they're looking for. However, I will bring up one thing that I think is a potential weakness, and it is something that has been a bit of a problem, and I think it's tough to overcome. Going back to that idea of media strength, the one I haven't mentioned for comic books is timing. This comic would have come out in 1963 had it been an original, and I also would be having it in a plastic case that, yay thick to protect it, because it would be like a family heirloom instead of the reprint that I paid $4 for. But those characters are still around. I mean, let's be fair. The entire team of X-Men would be on AARP by now, not to mention Social Security. They would be too old to function. Same with the first family, Fantastic Four. But that's not how comics work. They don't age. And they age, there's such a thing as Marvel time or DC time, to kind of explain this, but, think about it this way. Spider-Man and Superman are now old enough that they have outlived the viability of the industry that they were really focused on, i.e. photography and reporting for newspapers. Newspapers just aren't that popular anymore. And as far as photography, for photographers for newspapers, every kid has a cell phone. How many pictures of Spider-Man do you think Jameson could get his hands on with that? It's just not viable like it once was. And these characters still exist. They've evolved somewhat. They changed slowly. But again, Magneto's still kicking around. Professor X is still kicking around. These characters are old enough that we'd expect them to have died of natural causes. So how do you do with that in live action film? Now, with animation, sure, you can maybe change voice actors and people may not notice. But in live action, Tony Stark is going to get too old eventually, and no amount of deep faking CGI is going to change that. Or AI, what have you. So what we're left with is, these actors who are going to age out of these roles. And again, if it was animated, sure, it'd be easy enough for Robert Downey Jr. to pop down to the studio and, probably wearing, sweats and walk in and not have to, armor up, or, same with Cap or Chris Evans or whoever. But it's been a problem. So this is one of the big reasons that we're starting to see these new Avengers pop up. Marvel has been using the comic book more or less as an idea farm at this point, because comic books, again, in print, are just not that successful anymore for a multitude of reasons, not the least of which is how the comic book industry kind of walled itself off for true fans, which that kind of gatekeeping has really affected its profitability. Saying that, as these actors are getting older, we're needing new blood. So, this is why they created characters like Ironheart, Kamala Khan, Miles Morales. It wasn't just to force diversity down people's throats, and I don't think that's really the case, to be honest, that it did force diversity down people's throats. These were characters that were interesting. But it also gives us young characters so that we can start, a Kate Bishop story as opposed to a Clint Barton story, knowing that Jeremy Renner probably doesn't want to start doing backflips again anytime soon. So that's why we have these newer heroes. And I think as an audience, there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be taken aback by that. And it's one of those weird things where comic book fans, again, we're used to the idea of things changing rapidly, sometimes radically. I mean, remember when Wolverine lost the adamantium on his skeleton to Magneto, or when Spider-Man got the black suit, which eventually became Venom. When Superman got split into blue and red. I could go on this list. Sasquatch from Alpha Flight became a woman for a while. These kind of changes will happen in comic books, sometimes just crazy reasons. What about Psylocke going from being a British woman to being a Japanese woman? Perfect examples of just crazy, crazy things that happen in comic books, and some of them stick, some of them don't. But again, a theatrical audience may not like it as much, may not enjoy it as much, especially when they're expecting a certain level of continuity or a certain level of stability. So with changing of guard actors, the only other way you could really do it would be to start recasting these roles, and that could get messy too. So it is a weakness of cinema over the comic book medium, or even an animated medium. Now, saying this, why do I think that Marvel's not as in dire straits as some people think? One, again, people love to trump at the end of stuff. It's happened as long as I can remember. Role-playing games were going to die out. Wow. Yeah, no. Video games, after the video game crash, that's it. Video games are going to die out. Tell that to the people tell that to people at Sony who are raking in millions. The big thing is, though, that I really don't believe this, because we see a lot of excitement with some of the projects that are coming up. Yes, there have been some missteps, but there have always been some missteps. Like I said, Thor was not really a great movie, and it didn't didn't get a lot of love early on because it wasn't a great movie. Same with Dark World. And honestly, Iron Man 2 was basically a retread of Iron Man 1. However, there are still things people are looking forward to, such as, say, these guys joining the Marvel Universe, or these guys joining the Marvel Universe. So I think that those are the things that are going to attract a lot of love. There's still, potential for Miles Morales, not to mention, Tom Holland's young enough to keep playing Spider-Man for a little while longer. We have a lot of this going on, and we have a lot of things that people are still looking forward to. So as much as I think that the Marvel Cinematic Universe is dying, I disagree with that logic. And that logic kind of comes from, again, I think really a disingenuous place. Have they made missteps? Sure. Can you name films that were bad in the series, new ones and TV shows? Sure. But I think as many of them were good as they were bad. And, this is, again, why you want to make good product. And maybe you can get them all to link together like this, which is something I think studios really have a hard time understanding. This idea that you could just, make a good movie. If it works, you can do side stories, rather than, immediately agreeing to the idea of doing a cinematic universe. I think oftentimes studio producers are not always the brightest people and not always the most perceptive. Again, look at what I said with Barbie. They're already thinking cinematic universe instead of just, let's do a sequel to Barbie and see how things go. Or, if you want to do something else, if you want to do a Hot Wheels movie, okay, dip your toe into that, but don't promise 40 different movies until you know for sure that a couple work, at least one or two. And even then, slow growth is the way to go. One of the problems I think that Marvel did have was starting to ramp up production to the point where it was too hard for the average fan to keep up with. There are simply more blockbusters than ever right now, and that's a problem because you can't see everything in the theater. Theaters aren't cheap, and damn. And this is all, ignoring COVID. I mean, if we want to hit that kettle of fish, that definitely affected everything as well. But honestly, those are the things that are causing the problem. And even if you look at another franchise like Star Wars, which, is it a cinematic universe or isn't it? Either way, again, too much product makes it too hard for people to see everything. So with that in mind, like I've said before, DC, I think, could do it well enough if they do it well. But look at, even then, the last 3 movies, one of the things that killed them, besides Flash and Black Adam being just terrible, for multiple reasons, was the fact that fans had heard that the cinematic universe was getting a reboot, so why bother going to see these? They're not going anywhere. And the reason that people would think that is because, again, you're not looking for a good movie at that point. What you're looking for is continuation of a story. You know, this might be a crappy part of the story. This might be the part of, you know, India or Raiders of the Lost Ark that you thought was dumb, but stick with it because, you know, there's a really cool part coming up next. So I guess my thoughts is that Hollywood, you know, two things: slow your roll, in all honesty, and two, you know, make good films. The way to do good films, and good really any medium, is to have passion for it. To you know, get people involved who want to do this. In fact, you know, not on the cinematic universe trail, look at the Five Nights at Freddy movies. Now, I'm 51. I played the first Five Nights at Freddy's at my daughter's behest, and honestly, I felt like the old man going, I don't get it. You kids with your Beatles and your... It just did not appeal to me at all. I could think of 10 games I'd rather play. And I took her to go see the movie because she was obsessed with seeing the movie. And from what I understand, the movie doesn't follow the games perfectly, but she loved it. The fans seemed to like it. That's the important part, and that's why it made, you know, 5 times its money back, and will probably get at least a sequel. But I also think it would be, you know, complete folly for Blumhouse to start doing $200 million Five Nights at Freddy's cinematic universe movies. You know, do one on Chica's Party Place or whatever. That would be foolish. So again, slow your roll. Focus on making a good film, putting the right people in it, putting the right passion behind the project, and you'll get a good movie. And so with that, all I can really say is, you know, I'm looking forward to some other Marvel projects. I haven't seen it yet. I'm probably going to wait for home video just because of my financial situations now, but I'm curious to see the Marvels as an example. And I will continue to watch Marvel projects, Marvel Cinematic Universe at least trepidatiously. I'm going to, you know, pick and choose what I like, but I don't think the thing is going to just be destroyed overnight or fall apart. And with that being said, I guess I'm going to bid you adieu and say Excelsior. Till next time.